Hey, this is Hutch. I'm going to read from Doc Smith's first Lensman of the famous Lensman series. This first book is called The Gift of the Secret Planet. It was copywritten in 1950. I've never read it before, so I'll give it a shot. Chapter 1. The visitor, making his way unobserved through the crowded main laboratory of the hill, stepped up to within 6 feet of the back of a big Norwegian seated at an electro-optical bench. Drawing an automatic pistol, he shot the apparently unsuspecting scientist 7 times, as fast as he could pull the trigger, twice through the brain, 5 times closely spaced through the spine. "Ah, Garland of Edidor, I have been expecting you to look me up. Sit down." Blond, blue-eyed Dr. Nels Bergenholm, completely undisturbed by the passage of the stream of bullets through his head and body, turned and waved one huge hand at a stool beside his own. "But those were not ordinary projectiles," the visitor protested. Neither person, or rather entity, was in the least surprised that no one else had paid any attention to what had happened. But it was clear that the one was taken aback by the failure of his murderous attack. "They should have volatilized that form of flesh. Should at least have blown you back to Arisia, where you belong." "Ordinary or extraordinary, what matter? As you, in the guise of Grey Roger, told Conway Costigan a short time since, I permitted that, as a demonstration of futility. Know, Garlane, once and for all, that you will no longer be allowed to act directly against any adherent of civilization, wherever situate. We of Arisia will not interfere in person with your proposed conquest of the 2 galaxies, as you have planned it, since the stresses and conflicts involved are necessary, and, I may add, sufficient, to produce the civilization which must and shall come into being. Therefore, neither will you nor any other Edorian so interfere. You will go back to Edor, and you will stay there." "You think so?" Garlane sneered. "You, who have been so afraid of us for over 2,000 million Terulian years that you dared not let us even learn of you? So afraid of us that you dared not take any action to avert the destruction of any one of your budding civilizations upon any one of the worlds of either galaxy? So afraid that you dare not, even now, meet me mind to mind, but insist upon the use of this slow and unsatisfactory oral communication between us? Either your thinking is loose, confused, and turbid, which I do not believe to be the case, or you are trying to lull me into believing that you are stupid." Bergenholm's voice was calm, unmoved. "I do not think that you will go back to Edor. I know it. You too, as soon as you have become informed upon certain matters, will know it. You protest against the use of spoken language because it is, as you know, the easiest, simplest, and surest way of preventing you from securing any iota of the knowledge for which you are so desperately searching. As to a meeting of our 2 minds, they met fully just before you, operating as Grey Roger, remembered that which your entire race forgot long ago. As a consequence of that meeting, I so learned every line and vibration of your life pattern, as to be able to greet you by your symbol, Garlane of Edor. Whereas you know nothing of me save that I am Arisian, a fact which has been obvious from the first." In an attempt to create a diversion, Garlane released the zone of compulsion which he had been holding, but the Eurasian took it over so smoothly that no human being within range was conscious of any change. "Is it true that for many cycles of time— it is true that for many cycles of time we concealed our existence from you," Bergenholm went on without a break. Since the reason for that concealment will still further confuse you, I will tell you what it is. Had you Edorians learned of us sooner, you might have been able to forge a weapon of power sufficient to prevent the accomplishment of an end which is now certain. It is true that your operations as Lo Sung of Ugar were not constrained, as Mithridates of Pontus, as Sulla, Marius, and Nerus of Rome, as Hannibal of Carthage, as those self-effacing Waits, Alexirexes of Greece, and Benocoptes of Egypt, as Genghis Khan and Attila, and the Kaiser, and the Mussolini, and Hitler, and the tyrant of Asia. You were allowed to do as you pleased. Similar activities upon Regal IV, Valentia, Palin VII, and elsewhere were also allowed to proceed without any effective opposition. With the appearance of Virgil Sams, however, the time arrived to put an end to your customary pernicious, obstructive, and destructive activities. I therefore interposed a barrier between you and those who would otherwise be completely defenseless against you. But why now? Why not thousands of cycles ago? And why Virgil Sams? Well, to answer those questions would be to give you valuable data. You may, too late, be able to answer them yourselves. But to continue, you accuse me and all Aresia of cowardice, and evidently muddy and inept thought. Reflect, please, upon the completeness of your failure in the affair of Roger's planetoid, upon the fact that you have accomplished nothing whatever since that time, upon the situation in which you now find yourself. Even though the trend of thought of your race is basically materialistic and mechanistic, and you belittle ours as being philosophic and impractical, you found, much to your surprise, that your most destructive physical agencies are not able to affect even this form of flesh, which I am now energizing, to say nothing of affecting the reality which is I. If this episode is the result of the customary thinking of the second in command of Edor's innermost circle, but no, my visualization cannot be that badly at fault. Overconfidence, the tyrant's innate proclivity to underestimate an opponent, these things have put you into a false position. But I greatly fear that they will not operate to do so in any really important future affair. Rest assured that they will not, Garlane snarled. It may not be exactly cowardice. It is, however, something closely akin. If you could have acted effectively against us at any time in the past, you would have done so. But you could act effectively against us now, or if you could act effectively against us now, you would be acting, not talking. That is elementary. Self-evidently true. So true that you have not tried to deny it. Nor would you expect me to believe you if you did. Cold black eyes stared level into the icy eyes of the Norwegian blue. Deny it? No. I am glad, however, that you use the word effectively instead of openly, for we have been acting effectively against you ever since these newly formed planets cooled sufficiently to permit the development of intelligent life. What? You have? How? That, too, you may learn. Too late. I have now said all I intend to say. I will give you no more information, since you already know that there are more adult Aresians than there are Edorians, so that at least one of us can devote his full attention to blocking the direct effort of any one of you. It is clear to you that it makes no difference to me whether you elect to go or to stay. I can and I will remain here as long as you do. I can and I will accompany you wherever you venture out of the volume of space protected by a Dorian screen. Wherever you go, the election is yours. Garlane disappeared. So did the Aresian. instantaneously. Dr. Nels Bergenheim, however, remained. Turning, he resumed his work where he had left off, knowing exactly what he had been doing and exactly what he was going to do to finish it. He released the zone of compulsion which he had been holding upon every human being within sight or hearing, so dexterously that no one suspected then or ever that anything out of the ordinary had happened. He knew these things and did these things in spite of the fact that the form of flesh, which his fellows of the Triplanetary Service knew as Nels Bergenholm, was then being energized, not by the stupendously powerful mind of Drunli the Molder, but by the Arisian child too young to be of any use in that which was about to occur. Arisia was ready. Every Arisian mind capable of adult or even near-adult thinking was posed to act when the moment of action should come. They were not, however, tense. While not in any sense routine, that which they were about to do had been foreseen by many cycles of time. They knew exactly what they were going to do and exactly how to do it. They waited. My visualization is not entirely clear concerning the succession of events, stemming from the fact that the fusion of which Drunli is a part did not destroy Garlane of Edor while he was energizing Grey Roger, a young watchman, Euconidor by symbol, thought into the assembled mind. May I take a moment of this idle time in which to spread my visualization for enlargement and instruction? You may, youth. The elders of Arisia, the mightiest intellects of that tremendously powerful race, fused their several minds into one mind and gave approval. That will be time well spent. Think on. Separated from the other Edorians by intergalactic distance as he then was, Garlane could have been isolated and could have been destroyed, the youth pointed out, as he somewhat diffidently spread his visualization into the public mind. Since it is axiomatic that his destruction would have weakened Edor somewhat and to that extent would have helped us, it is evident that some greater advantage will accrue from allowing him to live. Some points are clear enough that Garlane and his fellows will believe that the Arisian fusion could not kill him, since it did not, and that the Edorians, contemptuous of our powers and thinking us vastly their inferiors, will not be driven to develop such things as atomic energy-powered mechanical screens against third-level thought, until such a time as it would be too late for even those devices to save their race from extinction, that they will, in all probability, never even suspect that the Galactic Patrol, which is so soon to come into being, will in fact be the prime operator in that extinction. It is not clear, however, in view of the above facts, why it has now been necessary for us to slay one Edorian upon Edor. Nor can I formulate or visualize with any clarity the techniques to be employed in the final wiping out of the race. I lack certain fundamental data concerning events which occurred and conditions which obtained many, many cycles before my birth. I am unable to believe that my perceptions and memory could have been so imperfect. Can it be that none of this basic data is, or even has been, available? That, youth, is the fact. While your visualization of the future is, of course, not as detailed nor as accurate as it will be after more cycles of labor, your background of knowledge is as complete as that of any other of our number. I see, Econodar gave the mental equivalent of a nod of complete understanding. It is necessary, and at the death of a lesser Edorian, a watchman, will be sufficient. Nor will it be either surprising or alarming to Edor's innermost circle that the integrated total mind of Arisia should be able to kill such a relatively feeble entity, I see. And then silence, and waiting, minutes or days or weeks, who can tell? What does time mean to any Arisian? Then Drunli arrived in the instant of his leaving the hill. What matters even galactic distance to the speed of thought? He fused his mind with those of the three other molders of civilization. The massed and united mind of Arisia, poised and ready, awaiting only his coming, launched itself through space. That tremendous, that theretofore unknown concentration of mental force arrived at Edor's outer screen in practically the same instant as did the entity that was Garlane. The Edorian, however, went through without opposition. The Arisians did not. Some 2,000 million years ago, when the coalescence occurred, the event which was to make each of the two interpassing galaxies teem with planets, the Arisians were already an ancient race, so ancient that they were even then independent of the chance formation of planets. The Edorians, it is believed, were older still. The Arisians were native to this, our normal space-time continuum. The Edorians were not. Edor was and is huge, dense, and hot. Its atmosphere is not air, as we small green terra know air, but it is a noxious mixture of gaseous substances known to mankind only in chemical laboratories. Its hydrosphere, while it does contain some water, is a poisonous, stinking, foully corrosive, slimy, and sludgy liquid. And the Edorians were as different from any people we know as Edor, as different from the planets indigenous to our space and time. They were, to our senses, utterly monstrous, almost incomprehensible. They were amorphous, ambioid, sexless, not androgynous or parthenogenic, but absolutely sexless, with a sexlessness unknown in any earthly form of life higher than the yeasts. Thus they were, to all intents and purposes, and except for death by violence, immortal, for each one, after having lived for hundreds of thousands of Tyrolean years, and having reached its capacity to live and to learn, simply divided into two new individuals, each of which, in addition to possessing in full its parent's mind and memories and knowledges, had also a brand new zest and a greatly increased capacity. And since life was, there has been competition for power. Knowledge was worthwhile only insofar as it contributed to power. Warfare began and aged and continued, the appallingly efficient warfare possible only to such entities as those. Their minds, already possessed powerful, grew stronger and stronger until the stresses of internecine struggle. But peace was not even thought of. Strife continued at higher and even higher levels of violence until two facts became apparent. First, that every Edorian who could be killed by physical violence had already died. That the survivors had developed such tremendous powers of mind, such complete mastery of things physical, as well as mental, that they could not be slain by physical force. Second, that during the ages through which they had been devoting their every effort to mutual extermination, their sun had begun markedly to cool, that their planet would very soon become so cold that it would be impossible for them ever again to live their normal physical lives. Thus there came about an armistice. The Edorians worked together, not without friction, in the development of mechanisms by the use of which they moved their planet across light years of space to a younger, hotter sun. Then Edor, once more at its hot and reeking norm, battle was resumed, mental battle this time, that went on for more than 100,000 Edorian years, during the last 10,000 of which not a single Edorian died. Realizing the futility of such unproductive endeavor, the relatively few survivors made a peace of sorts. Since each had an utterly insatiable lust for power, and since it had become clear that they could neither conquer nor kill each other, they would combine forces and conquer enough planets, enough galaxies, so that each Eddorian could have as much power and authority as he could possibly handle. What matter that there were not that many planets in their native space? There were other spaces, an infinite number of them, some of which, it was mathematically certain, would contain millions upon millions of planets instead of only 2 or 3. By mind and by machine, they surveyed the neighboring continua. They developed the hyperspatial tube and the inertialess drive. They drove their planet spaceship-wise through space after space after space. And thus, shortly after the coalescence began, Eddor came into our space-time, and here, because of the multitudes of planets already existing and the untold millions more about to come into existence, it stayed. Here was what they had wanted since their beginnings. Here were planets enough. Here were fields enough for the exercise of power, to sate even the insatiable. There was no longer any need for them to fight each other. They could now cooperate wholeheartedly, as long as each was getting more and more and more. Enphilisor, a young Arisian, his mind roaming eagerly abroad as was its wont, made first contact with the Eddorians in their space. Inoffensive, naive, innocent, he was surprised beyond measure at their reception of his friendly greeting. But in the instant before closing his mind to their vicious attacks, he learned the foregoing facts concerning them. The fused mind of the elders of Arisia, however, was not surprised. The Arisians, while not as mechanistic as their opponents, and innately peaceful as well, were far ahead of them in the pure science of the mind. The elders had long known of the Eddorians and their lustful wanderings through plenum after plenum. Their visualizations of the cosmic all had long since forecast, with dreadful certainty, the invasion which now occurred. They had long known what they would have to do. They did it, so insidiously as to set up no opposition. They entered the Eddorians' minds and sealed off all knowledge of Arisia. They withdrew, tracelessly. They did not have much data, it is true, but no more could be obtained at that time. If any one of those touchy, suspicious minds had been given any cause for alarm, any focal point of doubt, they would have had time in which to develop mechanisms able to force the Arisians out of this space before a weapon to destroy the Eddorians. The as yet incompleted designed galactic patrol could be forged. The Arisians could, even then, have slain by mental force alone all the Eddorians except the All-Highest and his innermost circle, safe within their impenetrable shield. But as long as they could not make a clean sweep, they could not attack then. Be it observed that the Arisians were not fighting for themselves. As individuals or as a race, they had nothing to fear. Even less than the Eddorians could they be killed by any possible application of physical force. Past matters of mental science, they knew that no possible concentration of Eddorian mental force could kill any one of them. And if they were to be forced out of normal space, then what then? To such mentalities as theirs, any given space would serve as well as any other. No, they were fighting for an ideal, for the peaceful, harmonious, liberty-loving civilization which they had envisaged as developing throughout and eventually entirely covering the myriads of planets of 2 tremendous island universes. Also, they felt a heavy weight of responsibility. since all these races, existing and yet to appear, had sprung from and would spring from the Aresian life spores which permeated this particular space, they all were and would be, at bottom, Aresian. It was starkly unthinkable that Aresia would leave them to the eternal dominance by such a rapacious, such a tyrannical, and hellishly insatiable breed of monsters. Therefore the Aresians thought, efficiently if insidiously, they could not interfere openly with Edor's ruthless conquest of world after world, with Edor's ruthless smashing of civilization after civilization. They did, however, see to it by selective matings and the establishment of bloodlines upon numberless planets that the trend of the level of intelligence was definitely and steadily upward. 4 molders of civilization, Drunli, Creedlagan, Neeler, and Brolatine, who, in fusion, formed the mentor of Aresia, who was to become known to every wearer of civilization's lens, were individually responsible for the Aresian program of development upon the 4 planets of Tellus, Regis 4, Valentia, and Palin 7. Duly established upon Tellus 2 principal lines of blood, an unbroken male line of descent that the Knizones went back to long before the dawn of even mythical Tyrolean history. Conexa of Atlantis, daughter of one Kinnison and sister of another, is the first of the blood to be named in these annals, but the line was then already old. So was the other line, characterized through its tremendous length, male and female, by peculiarly spectacular red-bronze auburn hair and equally striking gold-flecked tawny eyes. Nor did these strains mix. Drunli had made it psychologically impossible for them to mix until the penultimate stage of development should be reached. While that stage was still in the future, Virgil Sams appeared, and all Aresia knew the time had come to engage the Eddorians openly, mind to mind. Garlane Roger was curbed, savagely and sharply. Every Eddorian, wherever he was working, found his every line of endeavor solidly blocked. Garlane, it has been intimated, constructed a supposedly irresistible weapon, and attacked his Aresian blocker, with results already told. At that failure, Garlane knew that there was something terribly amiss, that it had been amiss for over 2,000 million Tyrolean years. Really alarmed for the first time in his long life, he flashed back to Edor, to warn his fellows and to take counsel with them as to what could be done. And the massed and integrated force of all Aresia was only an instant behind him. Aresia struck Edor's outermost screen, and in the instant of impact, that screen went down. And then instantaneously, and all unperceived by the planet's defenders, the Aresian forces split. The elders, including all the molders, seized the Eddorian who had been handling that screen, threw around him an impenetrable set of force, yanked him out into intergalactic space. Then, driving in relentlessly, they turned the luckless wight inside out. And before the victim died under their poignant probings, the elders of Aresia learned everything that the Eddorian and all of his ancestors had ever known. They then withdrew to Aresia, leaving their younger, weaker, partially developed fellows to do whatever they could against mighty Edor. Whether the attack of these lesser forces could be stopped at the second, or the third, the fourth, or the innermost screen, whether they would reach the planet itself and perhaps do some actual damage before being driven off, was immaterial. Edor must be allowed, and would be allowed, to repel that invasion with ease. For cycles to come, the Edorians must and would believe that they had nothing really to fear from Arisia. The real battle, however, had been won. The Arisian visualizations could now be extended to portray every essential element of the climactic conflict, which was eventually to come. It was no cheerful conclusion at which the Arisians arrived, since their visualizations all agreed in showing that the only possible method of wiping out the Edorians would also of necessity and their own usefulness as guardians of the civilization. Such an outcome had been shown necessary. However, the Arisians accepted it and worked toward it unhesitatingly. So that's chapter 2. Holy moly. That's a lot of words. I guess that the Edorians are bad, and the Arisians are good, and there's a lot of mental powers. And a little bit reminds me of Green Lantern and his Guardians of Oa. That's just from comic books, not from the movie. Yeah, I don't think I want to read chapter 2. So if you're a big fan of that book, that's cool. I may have missed the boat on that one. Just doesn't really appeal to me at all. All right, well, perhaps next time I'll read something else that you and I both enjoy. Till then, this is Hutch signing out.